curtain and make sure
Let
that...
me change my microphone. Hello. Okay.
Excellent. Well, that's maybe not great. Says we... all right, we're good. Sorry, I opened it up to check on my monitor. It's like, you guys were online 2 seconds ago. It's like, oh no, but we should be good. Hello, and welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host Mango,
and I am your co-host Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about the Vault of the Incarnates raid in World of Warcraft. Before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we take a break from our regularly scheduled Fast and the Furious content. Okay, from our video game movies content, to instead cover World of Warcraft content. So with the patch looming, breathing down our necks. Okay, next week is the 10.1 patch, called something that I don't remember. Embers of Neltharion is what it's called. Our raid team made our big final push to get ahead of the curve, defeat heroic Razageth. We were, in fact, able to do so last week, even as we cast aspersions on our own raid's ability to complete this raid. I said it was probably the hardest raid since Azshara. And then on Tuesday night, we mopped Razageth up with 30 minutes left on the clock. I sort of couldn't believe it, but that leaves us in this position where we can give our review of the raid, Vault of the Incarnates. We've been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
How did you feel?
Yeah, well, let's start with the Razageth stuff, I guess, just because we did talk about it at the end of last week, and then we we surprised even ourselves, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we just kind of got into it, and we really just kind of kept making continuous progress throughout the night and hit it about, like you said, about a half hour, and that was super. I was super happy about that. I don't know what clicked there. Maybe it was just all of us were there, right? All of the high performers were kind of there.
Yep.
And
yeah, we had 2 guest stars, Merak and Anariel, Merak and Q, right? Who were longtime raiders with us last expansion. They moved on to a different raid group, but came back after getting their AOTC.
Yeah,
I think the Friday before, right?
I didn't realize that, but yeah, no, I mean they were we also, what do we have any? Do we have anybody? We had essentially it worked out, right? That's all I guess I can say about it, right? Is it worked out? We managed to really pull it off. Everybody trying their hardest, I guess, and it just worked. Is there anything else you wanted to say about our particular run before we go boss by boss, I guess?
I don't know. Razageth is really interesting, and we can talk. Let's talk about Razageth at the end. Our particular run was actually kind of nuts. But there came a point where I flipped. I was like, we're never getting this, to, oh my God, we're gonna kill her tonight, right?
Yeah.
And I guess maybe my own my own perception of how difficult Razageth and the raid was kind of off. Just because once we kind of got there, it clicked so much easier than I expected it to.
Yeah, I want to check something real quick. It's because I died 2 minutes before we finished the kill, and I think I still parsed pretty high, all things considered.
Really?
Yeah,
that's incredible. Being 2 minutes down, right? 120.
Yeah, maybe I was wrong about wrong about what the exact thing was, but no, it says that was a wipe. Let me see if I can figure. What did I manage to not record?
Did we not log our Razageth kill? That would be so funny.
That is weird because I was looking at it. It looks like maybe I didn't. That's
Hold on, one second. Let me check. No, we definitely no. We have it. I have it. I'm looking at it here. You parsed. Yeah, I mean you got a green parse, 36%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean green's not great. What was my parse by level? That's usually what I look at.
36% was by level.
Okay, never mind. I must have been looking at one of the wipes because I guess I stopped recording parses at some point. Never mind.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, no. Obviously I wish I hadn't died, but satisfied enough with it. I was also like optimized for multi-hit stuff so we could get through the intermissions easily. But
yeah, that part is the part that I actually find the most interesting, I think. Was like the little sort of kinds of optimizations that we sort of ended up taking. But yeah.
Yeah, okay, well, we will get back to that, but I think that this launched into a neat point. Is I like this raid because there's a lot of multi-target fights, which monks are historically much better at than their single-target stuff. So I got to do some decent damage, right? It was funny watching us progress through the fights because there were a lot of fights where like when we were starting to do them and we were like getting like we were not really plowing through the fights. Like towards the end, we started plowing through some of those fights, right? Like early runs on Aranog, I did really well because I could line up 4 things to hit with flying guillotine. Whereas like late fights, like they would start dropping one by one, and I wouldn't be able to get like the nice juicy combos off of them, which was much less satisfying. But that kind of overall was like, I got to do a lot of multi-target stuff, which felt really nice.
Also, yes, new patch is next week, Arahi in the chat. It is next fucking week. Get ready.
Yay.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I actually have the opposite experience, which is that I feel like the fights were mostly single target except for council. And so I felt like I was having a good time just sort of blasting a very single target focused arms build. I think arms is pretty well designed at the moment because there are 2. Okay, this is maybe like a class design thing more than a boss design thing, but one of the things that's interesting about the arms tree is there are kind of 2 radically different builds, depending on if you're going into AoE situations or if you're going into single target situations. If you're doing single target situations, you're very keyed into Mortal Strike. You're trying to build up these Mortal Strikes or whatever and get all these resets on Mortal Strike. There are some the Mortal Strike itself has like a 25% chance to reset its own cooldown. And then also a filler ability, Overpower, has a 35% chance to reset Mortal Strike. And so it is literally just try and get every Mortal Strike you possibly can, right? And this is for like single target builds. For AoE, it's very built around Blade Storm, right? You are using anger management in order to reduce the cooldown on Blade Storm and get these big, juicy, huge Blade Storms. And then Blade Storm kind of amps your strength, it buffs your strength a whole bunch, and you use that for like big, huge whirlwinds, and you kind of have this on-off thing of you're dumping rage to build into your Blade Storm. Your Blade Storm happens, you dump rage on big high damage AoE things with this strength buff, and then you're dumping rage to kind of reset the cooldown on Blade Storm. And those don't play extremely differently, but they play differently enough that like it really feels like I'm kind of accessing a new thing. And something that I was frustrated about in Shadowlands, right? And I talked about in Shadowlands was the way in which not having a tier set sort of locked down how your class played, right? Every patch of Shadowlands, I basically played the exact same way, right? My rotation was the same, the talents I was taking were the same, the stuff I was looking to do with those talents was basically the same, right? And one of the things that WoW had done traditionally to sort of fix that issue was between patches, you would get a tier set, and the tier set would emphasize different parts of your kit. And when it did that, it changed up your build. And you were still approaching the fundamentals of your class, but the details were different. And that was very fun. That was very exciting, right? When tier sets were kind of around versus when they sort of left off. Now, because of the way that talents work, I kind of have that experience inside of a patch itself. Because when I'm doing dungeons, I'm using one spec, right? When I'm doing raids, I'm using another spec. And they're playing so differently that I actually have like that sort of varied game experience from the get-go, which is kind of neat and kind of fun. But for me, I was just happy to stick on bosses, right? I basically never wanted to touch an ad, to be honest with you. And most of the time I just didn't. I just stayed on the boss and I cleaved onto an ad maybe, but that was like the best you would get out of me.
So just to your point about like, I think this raid had more multi-target options, right? Like I'll grant you that. And 2, when I said it had, what I mean is that it has more than a typical raid, because typical raid you get like 1, right? Like I have felt like in the past that I have not had a ton of opportunity to like really do my multi-target stuff on most fights, and it just felt like by my count, I had, you know, 3 2/2 to 4.5 opportunities to do multi-target. Like Aranog, I was a multi-target spec. Council, I was a multi-target spec. In
Dathia, maybe.
So Dathia, I was in my world spec, which is hybrid, because I wanted the multi-target stuff for the launches. And, what's it? Broodkeeper. Broodkeeper was, I mean, and that was like very, what's the word? Two-sided.
Yeah, because that's maybe emblematic, right? Because of the way that Broodkeeper kind of has two teams, one of which is doing AoE, one of which is single target. Yeah.
And then on Razageth, like I said earlier, I was in multi-target spec to deal with the intermissions, which maybe wasn't strictly necessary, but like I at least got to flex. Like, I don't know if you remember, but like on our early normal clears, I would like pop up to the top of the DPS charts and then like slowly fall down as the fight went on, just because I was able to like wipe out so much stuff, which like always feels good.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is not like the wisdom that most people will ever live by, because there's almost a prisoner's dilemma to raiding, where people don't think about raid. You know what I mean? It's not like it's very uncommon for you to get a directive from a raid leader that says, I want you and you in your multi-target specs, because there's a little bit of ad stuff and I want to make sure that we have big pumpers for the ad phases, but everyone else is doing single target, right? Normally what happens is you go online, you read your guide, and the guide tells you, oh, for this fight, you should run single target, right? And because everyone is sort of getting that information themselves, right? And there isn't that kind of directive coming down. It creates a situation where there are raid fights where ads will pop up and it actually takes them a while to go down. And it's like, man, honestly, 2 people should have just taken like the overall DPS hit, right? And spec'd into a multi-target thing, not for the purposes, it's less overall DPS for the raid and probably makes the boss like lower or whatever, but it actually makes it easier to get through the boss because you're doing
right.
certain stuff at certain phases. And I actually think that is the proper way to approach raiding. Which is why I sort of call that like almost like a prisoner's dilemma, because it's kind of actually hurting the raid when everyone is sort of setting their own priorities based on what is going to get them, whatever it is, like the best parse or whatever. But I actually bet that it would have been much harder for us to get the Razageth kill if you had been in a single target spec.
Yeah, I mean, there's even like little intangible things, right? Like it would have been much harder for us to get the Razageth kill if we didn't happen to have me and Mark throwing down Rings of Peace.
Rings of Peace.
In the second intermission, right? Which has nothing to do with our specs, right? Like, it's a talent we you have to take, but it's like not like it's like built the fighting or whatever, right? Like,
but yeah, it's important utility, right?
Yeah, no, but I think you're absolutely right about that, right? Like there have been a couple of like what's the Earth gut what's the
Taros?
Not Taros, Grim Totem. Kura Grim Totem, where like, I will like drop DPS to go run and stand in like a lightning spot or something, right? Like it's like, well, I guess I gotta do that, right? Like, this was also a thing that happened in like the one that comes to mind is Artificer inside of Castle Nathria, where like there were times where it's like, oh, well, I guess I'm picking up the seed and like stopping DPS just to make sure like that the raid survives, right? Like even if it kills me, right? Like
yep.
And like it is kind of a prisoner's dilemma thing, right? Like it's like do I sacrifice my deeps? And it's even sadder just because like your parse doesn't actually matter, right? Like what matters is if you got the boss down or not, right?
No, this is the 2 game theory, right? A WoW designer who would end up leaving WoW, I think he was working at Riot now, had this thing where he talked about how there are really 2 games, right, that people are playing when they're raiding. Game number 1, and the game that the Blizzard designs for, is you and your friends are teaming up to kill a boss, right? Victory is the boss dies, defeat is the boss lives, right? You wipe, kind of thing. And then there is the game of parsing, right? Where you are competing vaguely with other people of your spec class in the world in order to have a perfect performance, right? And there are competing incentives there, right? I remember there was one of our Castle Nathrias where I had been running seeds the whole time, and I was like, hey, can somebody else just run seeds for me once so that I can just get a good parse on this fight? Because I've been parsing green this whole time, and everywhere else I have a legendary or an epic parse, right? But I can't get a fucking good parse in this because I'm running seeds, right? And that's a decision that gets made specifically because, right, I was looking to play game number 2 and not game number 1, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, and part of that is like, individual accomplishment versus like, and like I even if you're not playing, yes, we're all striving for like the highest parses, but like you're also playing against yourself in some ways, right? Like it's like, it's like a time trial thing, right? Like, can you beat yourself? Which I think is important. But yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you on all this. But we should probably go through the bosses.
Yeah, let's go through the specifics. So the first boss fight, Aranog, Dragonkin, he sounds a lot like Garrosh. What were your thoughts? Tell me all of your thoughts.
Because the previous thing about like enjoying the multi-target stuff, like this was like a great. So first, I guess we should start with the dragons part, right? Like just like as an opening mechanic.
Yeah, flying over things. I love that shit. Yeah, that was fun.
The opening trash is not normal trash. You get on a dragon and you hit buttons and you kill the trash. And this is funny because like it's kind of a gimme, but like we got better at it as the raid went on, right? Like we were clearing more and more of the trash with and not having to do like a fight or two, right? Which and that's totally divorced from my level, so there's just kind of like raw experience, right? Like so I thought that was a good opener. It's a nice palate cleanser. It's fun. You don't have to like worry about like nonsense. And Aranog himself, like I said, because of the multi-target thing, I enjoyed those early pulls because it was like, oh, I can kill like the 4 ads at once with my flying guillotine, and and that feels good, right? Otherwise, like I feel like Aranog kind of fell out of my memory fast because like he was the one that we got on farm like immediately, right? Like I feel like even when we started heroic, we weren't having too much trouble with him. And so kind of like the more kind of the design of the strat or like typical strategy is you rotate around the room, that way you don't end up filling up the room. We've been doing that since, but like we probably don't need to, we probably could have just like gone buck wild with placing stuff on the floor and like wouldn't have mattered because we were like nailing him so hard.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite detail about Aranog is that you can DPS him in the, he does this thing where there are fire elementals that spawn at the edge of the room, and there are big chains of fire between them. If you get hit by those chains, you get one shot, right? So what you have to do is you have to pick one of the fire elementals, kill it, it'll break the chain, and there's a little gap that the whole raid can run through or whatever. And while Aranog is doing this, he is channeling in the middle of the room, right? And the fire elementals are slowly walking towards him. Now, this is the kind of thing, it is a DPS check. You need a fixed amount of damage in order to kill that elemental before it is a danger for your raid, and you probably don't need your whole raid there. So the thing that we learned pretty quickly was, if somebody wants to just fuck off and go DPS Aranog for the duration of that portion of the fight, you're probably still going to be fine. And that person was me. I did that every time, and it was really satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, and I would like, monks have a nice mobility. I would like run back and do that too. It's like, oh, we broke it. Get some hits in. Killed me at least once where I didn't pop out fast enough.
Yeah.
But still super fun. So, yeah, I think
Aranog also had the fire ring. Did you care about the fire ring at all?
The fire ring, which is this?
So in terms of loot, right?
The loot piece.
There's a ring that like increases your DPS if you find a way to do some fire damage. For a lot of classes, it was a best in slot ring just because that extra fire damage is a little like above the kind of over the top, right? I don't know if that mattered for monks at all. It vaguely mattered for me, but I never got the ring and I didn't really care about it.
Yeah, monks are basically in the same. Like we don't have like a native source of fire damage, but like we are melee fighters, so you can get like the the cowl that like puts you on fire, and then it makes it really good. But like that was one of those things like, I'll roll on the ring if I get it. Maybe I'll adjust my build, but I never did, and I didn't care enough to like really push for it. So,
yep, I feel you. Yeah, as far as loot pinata bosses, you always start the raid off on one of these. Aranog is fine. He doesn't remind me of any truly interesting, or maybe the Terragru, it was sort of the best of these, right? The Terragru was the first boss in Sanctum of Domination. The Terragru was a great fight, not just because of the powers, right, that you would end up picking up and being able to just like really do some insane pumping, right? But also because the Terragru had been an established piece of the world, right? Something that I think is interesting about WoW raid design has been their ability to sort of precede boss fights with like, so you know who you're kind of walking in and fighting. And we didn't really have any of that kind of stuff with Aranog. So he's just kind of okay.
Yeah, yeah, I think I agree with that.
The
Alright.
next boss that we would go to was Taros.
Yeah,
Specifically.
typically, we alternated week to week which side we went to, but like let's do
Yeah,
that side
I
first.
have a complicated feeling, which is that I think Taros is sort of the most boring, but also the best fight in the raid. I think it is the most elegantly designed fight in the raid. Does that make sense?
I don't know if I agree with you, but I'll see what. Like, I think there's something
So
that's very satisfying about it, like a pure tank and spank, which is Aeronog's pretty, or not Aeronog, Taros is pretty close to, but like I don't know if I'd call it particularly elegant.
the thing that I think is really clever and unique is all of the positioning around the rocks in the room, right? Basically, like from this point on, there are fights that are themed to different elements, right? Because obviously primalists are like returned to elements or whatever. Aranog is the fire elemental. Oh, we did get some establishment with Aranog. There was a quest line that set him up. You know what? Fair enough. Taros is earth, and he's making these earthen pillars and like hitting you and stuff. But the thing that I thought was so clever and really an interesting mechanic was putting the big circle on one person that the whole raid has to soak. And inside of that big circle, there are certain people who have little circles, and those little circles are going to spawn pillars. And then the tanks need to aim a boss mechanic on those pillars, but they need to split the pillars up such that you only do half of the pillars at a time. Because if you do all of the pillars in one tank shot, you're going to wipe the raid, right? I think all of that is just really compelling sort of stuff. And insofar as like rating is kind of like choreography, right? And you're like dancing and you're like executing on a really complicated dance. The way in which you are implicitly communicating with people over the course of our Taros kills, right? Was really satisfying to see, right? Where at first it was people didn't quite know what to do. They were really jumbled and the tanks couldn't figure it out, right? And then it was, okay, we're getting better at seeing one another with the circles and bunching up and going, oh, there's 4 people on this side, 2 people on that side. I'm going to run. So we get 3 and 3, right? And at the same time, all of this is happening inside of the big, there's something about taking the play space, reducing it to a very small space, and then saying there are specific people who are going to have to position in very specific ways in order to not wipe the raid, and seeing us get good at that dance, not even explicitly, right? We didn't over design a solution for it. You just intuited the answer a lot of the time and kind of went, I'm going to go on this side, I'm going to go on that side. People kind of adjusted, and you trusted the other people in the raid to adjust, and the tanks were good about communicating. Oh, I'm going to get this side, I'm going to get that side. And there's like other stuff happening too, obviously, with like, falling rocks and creating debris and where people are and all of this or whatever. But I just thought all of that was like, this is like peak raiding, right? Where, the fight is complicated enough that it is truly complex and skill testing, but it is also able to be sublimated after lots of pulls, right? And that progression of this is hard and we're fucking it up to we got it is really satisfying. I think that's probably the most satisfying thing about raid, which is why that's my argument for Taros is the best designed fight in this raid.
I think there's another aspect to it too, which helps you like track that progress, which is essentially there's like a time limit. You've got 4/4 of the room to fill up with like damage stuff.
Yep.
And you can tell how much you're improving based even post kill based on how like what quarter you kill him in, right? And I think that just kind of helps with that too, right? Like I don't know if I would most elegant I might give you just because elegance is a slightly different kind of standard than, most interesting or most fun. But I can see where you're coming from. Uh, little things too, like some people in the raid were very concerned that we stand in the right place so the quarter doesn't shoot in the right direction. I don't think it ever shot in the wrong direction once, so I don't know if those fears were overblown or not. But it was amusing to me. Just like
I'm sorry, the what shot in the wrong direction?
so when he does this part where he like lays down the damaging ground on the ground, that you have to run out of. There are people in the raid that were very insistent we stand in a certain spot when we weren't doing mechanics because otherwise the corner might shoot in the wrong direction. Stack on skull, as Luke puts it. And we never had it shoot in the wrong direction. Maybe that was because we were good at adhering to stack on skull. I know that I was like not the strictest adherent to that, especially post that first quarter. But it is what it is.
Was that one person was marked with skull and we were supposed to stack on that?
No, skull was like in front of him, so like it was a spot on the ground. That way, essentially, like I don't know if this was like a random thing or whatever, but like if we spread out evenly around the boss, right? Theoretically, he could shoot it in any of the 4 directions, right? And
oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Yes, I do. I don't think that was a thing. I'm sorry. I thought you meant because there's the yellow circles on the ground that come down and then they spawn secondary circles.
Yeah, you have to run out for.
Yeah, and to be fair, I pitched a strategy that I used in another raid for that was wrong, and I never actually explained why it was wrong. Like, this is the kind of thing I picked up the strategy from the other raid and I just kind of repeated it verbatim. But then once I was the person in charge of that strategy, in a way, like I had sort of owned it, I was like, wait, this is ridiculous. We should not be running back. We should be running to the side, because what you can do is you can paint around the edge, right? If you hug that left side where the edge of the rock mud is, right? He puts the yellow there, and then you run to the left. Does it make sense? And then he that's where the stuff goes, and you go back to where he was in the beginning, and you're fine.
Yeah.
But you do that with 100% melee uptime. I just sort of started doing that at a certain point, and I never told anybody, and it always worked out and was fine, right? But I made a big deal about running the stuff back, so you're putting the goop out in range instead of in melee, which was not correct.
I mean, it's but that's like a minor optimization, right? Like towards the end, like after the first quarter went down, it's be like, go jump in the bad and hold there for a couple seconds so it drops there, also a strategy, right? Like, I don't think it was like a huge deal. But the thing I was talking about was like painting that like quarter down on the ground, right? Like people in the raid in our raid were very concerned about it going in the wrong direction.
People definitely get really attached to certain mechanics. And I have definitely seen where like little things will become like pet mechanics that people are like, it's not gonna wipe the raid. It's not gonna fucking matter, right? It really is not an issue if on whatever. I don't know. I don't even know what a good version of this might be, but it's just like very minor things. But people get really bent out of shape when the minor things aren't going well, and I think that's just like the nature of the beast when it comes to the way raid asks you to sort of adhere to the strategy, right?
Yeah. No, I mean this is a thing I've talked about in Payday 2. Right, like it's like you stick to the plan and you do the plan because otherwise things can get out of control. And I think there's an argument for like good discipline is a good habit to build. Right, it's like it doesn't matter for this mechanic, but it might matter for the next mechanic. And if you have, if you're not in line, it might be an issue, right? That type of thing.
Yeah, there's sort of like it reminds me of like an alignment chart, like lawful neutral, right? Like lawful neutral is you stick to the plan, even if the mechanic doesn't matter, you execute the mechanic, and chaotic is like, I don't care. I'm just doing
chaotic neutral is healers adjust, or no, that's maybe chaotic evil is healers adjust.
Healers adjust. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh man.
Excuse me.
I love that meme. And it's a Final Fantasy 14 meme, right? The healers adjust, right?
True.
Yeah,
so Taros, I think I probably agree with you. I don't think he's the best overall fight in the raid, but he is my pick for the most elegantly designed. I think he's just the best designed, just on a raw gameplay level. That boss is really, really well designed. The next boss is Senarth. Ice Spider, you're going up the thing. I don't know, how did you feel about that, Senarth?
I thought Senarth was neat. It's because it had a lot of opportunity for like fun little micro optimizations, right? Like the boss is moving, so it's like, oh, I need to make sure to place my, my tiger statue a little bit ahead of where she's walking, and they'll get the full
Yep.
ticks on it, right? Like, I need to, save my touches of death for the big spiders. I need to really get good use out of my transcendence transfer by being able to keep up time, getting pulled off the edge and popping back, or other various things of that. Like I need to it was a good fight for testing like kind of like all pieces of mastery, right? It's like, oh, I'm getting too many stacks. I need to like do something to clear them. I was able to clear it with tigers last. It's like, oh, this is a neat little trick, right? Like, all that combined with kind of like, the kind of like, I was talking about like, it feels good when you kind of like have like big markers of your progression on the fight. The big marker for Senarth is if you're killing her fast enough, she will zoom up to the top of the level. We got that like once, like a couple weeks ago, and I was like, yeah, baby, we're really doing it. We're really cranking on it, right? Like that's always fun. And like, so at some points it felt a little hectic, right? Like there's a lot to keep track of, on an individual level, but I still enjoyed the fight overall. I don't know if I really disliked any of the fights in this raid, but
all right, I'll make the claim that Senarth I think is the worst fight in the raid. Not that I hate it.
Right.
It's really tough to get me to really like hate a boss fight, right? Maybe Stone Legion Generals is the last boss fight I really loathed. Certain people have certain, like other people hated Fate Scribe. I personally really like Fate Scribe. But stuff, like there's stuff like that. For me, Senarth is just kind of boring. It's just kind of nothing.
I think it's the weakest thematically, definitely, right? Like the giant ice spider is the one that like makes the least sense to me from like I know there are ice spiders out in the world, but like,
well, so the story of it is that Kurog is summoning these, right? He is summoning giant elementals. Taros is great because of the trash in front of it, which sets it up, right? You have this dwarven shaman who is finishing the summoning on Taros to bring Taros, this massive earth elemental, into our plane, right? But the rest of her shamans panic. She can't contain it or whatever, and Taros kills her, right? And it's just like, you don't need much more than that. That's all you need, right? In order to make that just on a narrative level somewhat satisfying, because it's the story of a villain undone by their own hubris, and it's not even inside of the boss fight. You just come in, you clean up Taros, and you move on, basically, right? Senarth doesn't really have the dignity to give you that on a story level. He just is there. It just is there, right? There's a little bit of stuff I think with Maligos and Calicos and Khadgar. And I famously hate Calicos, and to be honest, I don't care. I just thought this sort of bit was super uninteresting. So to me, Senarth was just a pretty boring, nothing, fight. Though I did not hate Senarth. That is true. I don't think I really hated any of the bosses in this raid.
Yep. Yep. I don't know if I have anything more to add to that. I see, I think I don't. Do I think she's the worst fight? I think I liked Dathia less, but that might just be I found her mechanics more aggravating. But that's but I can see, I could agree with her being the worst fight, even if I didn't think she was particularly bad. But yeah.
Yeah, and then we have Kurog, obviously. Yeah. Kurog is one of the wing bosses, and he has, he's a super powerful shaman, and there are the 4 quadrants in the room, and he gets entirely new mechanics based on what quadrant he's in, and he's doing, lightning stuff in the air section, he's doing, fire stuff in the fire section, all of that kind of thing. I like Kurog quite a lot, but this fight, Kurog, I have begun to learn, is the kind of fight that I love the most, which is a player class or an iconic sort of, archetype done as a raid boss, right? So for instance, in Sanctum of Domination, Kel'Thuzad was my favorite fight. And the reason why is because he is the, archetypal lich. He has all of the cool lich abilities that I want a cool lich to have. and he uses them over the course of the fight, and it feels like I am fighting a lich. Evocative is the term I use for
Yeah.
that, right? Another example of this would be Gul'dan, right? Gul'dan is the archetypical warlock, and he is a warlock who is made into a raid boss, right? He is summoning demons, he's using, hellfire, he is drawing huge amounts of power, like fel power into himself, and it eventually undoes him or whatever, right? Like that kind of stuff. It's pretty common for this sort of thing to just sort of be, sprinkled throughout raids in WoW history. I could probably go through WoW history and just sort of hit like a dozen of these, Jaina is the frost mage, right? Up to and including using ice block, right? You know, the Loa shaman, like from also from Battle of Dazar lore is like that, right? Where they're sort of, maybe they're almost like druids, right? But they're adopting the sort of skills and abilities of the Loa that we have met, right? Like that kind of stuff I think is really sweet, and I think is really interesting. And Kurag is this version of a shaman, right? He is, using cool shaman stuff, and he makes me think, wow, I am fighting a very powerful, very evil shaman. And I think that's the thing that maybe makes him my favorite fight in the raid. Maybe. I don't know. What do you think?
He's not my favorite, but he was definitely a lot of fun. Um, uh, I think I agree with you on the evocative standpoint. I don't know. I was not as in love with him as you obviously are, but that's just because like I think I'm a little bit more mechanics forward, and the mechanics were neat, but like I don't know. It's kind of I found them to be uh not bad, but like a little bit annoying. And then it's like, oh, I got to do a bunch of little stuff, and like also like there are ads to kill, but not enough ads that can really justify being in my multi-target build, right?
Sure.
So I got to like peel off and do that, and like deal with that stuff, and like it was fine. But it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was my favorite, but it was a decent fight. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think he's a little bit basic, which is maybe what I
Yeah.
like. I'm not quite sure what my favorite fight is in the raid. And we'll talk about my other one later.
Yeah.
But
To that point, right? It's like instead of being like a handful of complicated mechanics, it's like every basic mechanic spread out among the four quadrants, right?
yeah, well, and that's sort of the thing that I think is cool. I like the idea that he has four bosses in one, right? He has, but each of those bosses is relatively simple, not super complicated, right? And you get to choose in which order you tackle that,
Sure.
right? But whenever you give a raid that kind of choice, very rarely do they take you up on it, right? Normally what happens is you kind of assign your favorite, we're going to do this, and that strategy sort of just kind of happens off screen, right? And you say, okay, for this raid, we're starting in lightning, and then we're going to frost, and then we're going to fire, whatever. I think, I think we did air, then earth or whatever. But like that's kind of the thing. And I wish that there was a way where, like we could do some of these fights without having to sort of deal with the overhead of like the meta or the community, because these are the kinds of fights that I do think are really like interesting and fun to do, and to sort of figure out for yourselves, if that makes sense, right?
Sure.
Like what is the best order of elements for us to take care of for our
I think we did do that at some level though, right? Like there were like early on some adjustments we made for our particular raid, since like we were having trouble with particular things, right? Like
Yep.
in particular, it's like which quadrant to pull Krog into after the second intermission, when it's kind of like you need to finish him out. And so I think I generally agree with you though. I do think that part of the meta thing though is that like that's part of the draw of the game, right? It's like it's a mystery that you all like the community collectively figures out together. So it's a hard thing to
Yep.
drop, but I feel that I definitely do.
Yep. After Kurog, it's Council, right? So we're doing the other wing. Council is maybe my other least favorite of the fights, just because it is a little bit too basic. Um, to like keep like council is the one that I would focus on the least, and I was disassociating from the fight. I was just kind of like doing whatever, and I wasn't really like thinking through it. I don't know. I don't have anything more complicated to say about council.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, I like Council because I got to flex some like AOE stuff. Although I didn't like, I never felt like I really like went off on Council like I do on some fights. But it was neat. I found the electricity stuff super fucking annoying. Just because I felt like you needed like a half second or so where like you couldn't get reinfected with lightning after you dropped it. Like a number of times where I like went up and dropped my thing off on a rock, and it's kind of like had to stay there until like people stopped like transferring the electricity to me while I was standing next to the rock. Was annoying.
Honestly, the thing that I wanted from that mechanic was just 1 second grace period of
Yeah.
like an arrow over my head that said, "You are marked, get out of melee." Because the thing that bothered me about it was you're in this big clump of melee, everybody gets a mark immediately, and then you have to go run out. But it's like there's not even you can't react to that. There's nothing to react to, right? It just happens. And if one person is in the melee clump, they're gonna mark everybody else, and then those marks are gonna spread, and it's just like a fucking nightmare. I don't know. I like the marks, to be fair. I think the marks are a neat mechanic. I just kind of wish that there was like a little bit more designed into them in order to give me like a real chance to respond and make a decision about them, right?
Yeah, I feel like they were also in like they were in this fight. They were in Dathia. Were they in a third fight? I feel like they might have been.
I think they were in a trash fight
Okay, maybe
before
that's
this.
it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, Dacia is better because the boss has a huge hitbox and
Right.
the platform is very wide. So I think it actually makes sense for it to work the way it does in Dacia because it's don't clump. You know what I mean? You want to spread, but it gives you enough room to spread. Where in Council, very specifically, it's not giving you enough room, right? Because there's
Yeah.
these fire patches on the ground and these earthen pillars that are popping up out of nowhere, and all of that stuff just kind of complicated matters. I felt like.
Yeah, so I think we can kind of smoothly transition into the Dathia fight. The problem I have with it in the Dathia fight is like there's like a fair amount of verticality to that fight, and you can pass the rings vertically, and that was like hard.
Yep.
That was like illegible, right? Like somebody would get blown over somebody else, and like you pass like the ring back and forth and be like, oh well, fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. But otherwise, like Dathia was like an annoying fight to me, right? Like, especially on heroic, right? Like I didn't feel comfortable going. Like I wanted to maintain a little bit of. There was enough multi-target element that I wanted to maintain a little bit of my multi-target stuff, which I ended up doing, which was fine. But it was still kind of like felt like I was like putting a lot of power into that for not a lot of like you said, Raiders Dilemma stuff. Right? It's like I'm putting I'm dropping my DPS overall to make sure that we get through these corner things. It's not even like I get a big enough boost out of that to feel super great about it. I also just kind of like occasionally had issues with not like getting pulled into the center. I was like maybe a little bit too risky with it, but it was also just felt like it was just a hair too much aggravating. Also like
I did it on purpose. I would sit there and I would, strafe around the boss, kind of running away from it, but eventually you would just get pulled in, and I was like, you know what, that's fine because I can charge on warrior. I can blink on mage. I would do ultra time stuff when I was on crew to take care of it. And like that stuff is like sort of fun. I don't know. I have a complicated feeling with Dathia because I don't love those forced movement mechanics as much. On melee, I find them to be very annoying because I'm trying to execute a rotation, but I'm like, you have to be moving. So it's just like, and maybe this is an argument that like I need a better version of my, because I'm using WASD for movement or whatever. But this thing of like I'm sitting on Q because Q is strafe left, and I'm running around sideways to the boss, but I also have to be cheated a little bit in so that I'm facing the boss and getting my damage up time, right? And my abilities are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or whatever. It's just like doing that on my fingers just like sucked kinesthetically.
I feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
But I did like that Dathia was a member of council who didn't die, and she was really mad that we killed her brother. And so, she accepts this power from Razageth, right? Like there's this little story in it. I thought that was the coolest shit. This is the kind of stuff that I feel like is pretty great about Vault of the Incarnates, right? Probably some of the best raid design in terms of just like narratively telling a story through when as you're moving throughout the raid, right? On one wing you have Kurog, summoning these elementals or whatever. He's about to summon the mother of all elementals. You got to kill him, right? On the other wing you have the council of whatever, and the council of one of the bosses from the council whatever survives, and she takes this insane power from Razageth, and she's gonna die, but she's gonna bring you all with her, that kind of a thing. So yeah.
Yeah.
No, I also do like any fight. I have decided this is one of my favorite things. A fight that splits the raid into teams is a good fight. I have never had a bad fight where you have like team 1, team 2 stuff going on. I feel like that's cool. That's fun. Every raid leader I know gets really mad about it because they're like, "Oh, I have to split the groups." But you know what? They can suck it. I like that. I think that's fun.
Yeah, no, I think I there's definitely a fun aspect to that, but I don't know. The thing that I think aggravated me the most about Diurna was like those little tornadoes that just kind of like wandered around the
Oh, I hated
platform.
those.
'Cause-
And the thing that killed me about those, when they're moving, it just shows you a little arrow
yeah,
and I was just like, the fuck does this mean? I wish it showed me a line.
yeah,
Right? I can dodge a line, like Massacre, for instance, on Siren Athreus is a good example of this. I can dodge a line. I cannot look for 7 individual arrows and figure out whether or not I'm in the path of them. Right? But whatever.
yeah. I definitely agree with you on that. But even when they were like more static, they would like wander around in circles. I always felt like one was chasing me specifically. It's like they were just like kind of aggravating in that. From that, it's like no, just stop bothering me. I already got out of your way. But yeah,
Absolutely. Yep, I get that 100%.
all right. So what's next? Diurna, I guess.
Yeah, so Broodmother. Broodmother is one of the most interesting fights, I think, because it is the kind of fight that I was talking about a little bit with Kurag, in the sense that it is a fight that the meta sort of defines itself, and we figured that out pretty quickly. We found a map that just showed where all of the eggs are and where you should go first, what eggs you should break. Some person in the community did that. There's another map that was where do all the ads spawn in what order, right? And to a certain extent, you're just following the map. But the mechanics themselves are so complicated, actually, that just executing on that piece of it is actually really fun. And I had a really good time with doing it, because the nature of, you never ran eggs, right?
No, I never even like looked at them, right? Like I was always on ads, right?
Yeah. Okay. I was always an egg runner until we needed my DPS to just be on boss. But like the being an egg runner is one of the most fun things I think I've ever done in the raid, right? It requires a lot of clear communication. In the moment, there are one of the most fun things about WoW, which is a complicated thing to design for, is a thing goes wrong and you needed to do hero shit to save it, right? So for instance, an egg is missed and there's now a dragon, right? And you do this thing of, oh, I'm going to taunt the dragon. I'm going to heroically bow to the ads group. I'm going to get the tank to taunt the dragon off of me. I'm going to run back and do eggs. That's really fun. Somebody misses an egg, so you're not on eggs, but you can pick up the buff and clear their egg in order to save it. That's really fun, right? And there's just a lot of like, oh, you miss an egg you miss one of the triple eggs, right, in one pack, but that you can just add an egg later on the 7th pull or something like that, right? That stuff I think is really fun and entertaining. And it makes the boss fight like a tactical problem, with a lot of room for error, but also a lot of room for correction on that error. And I don't know that I've ever done as fun a boss as Diurna at that specific thing, right? Of saving the day when everything goes wrong. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does, because
Yeah.
I've been I also had those moments, right? Like sometimes break an egg and I'd have to run over, taunt with provoke, and like drag it back to the tank on the ads group, or like, you know, the tank is like somebody who's a little bit slower, so I cast Tiger's Lust on the tank to get him to run in. I think Diurna might be my favorite fight of the raid.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Diurna is competing with Kurag, right? For my favorite fight of the raid, just for like that reason. Like the general thing of like the story thing of she saw Aranog as her son, and so Aranog's death she takes really personally, and she's like, I don't even give a fuck about the Primalist, I just want to kill you for killing him, kind of thing. I think that was cool, right? It's neat to have boss motivation that's not just, oh, I put my lieutenants in your way so that you couldn't reach me in time, that kind of thing, right? But I think really what makes Diurna so fun is just like the particular way that fight was designed to maximize this precariousness of, can the raid execute on these mechanics?
Yeah. No, I like Diurna's also a fight where I feel like it was the fight where like I had the most kind of like the biggest biggest separation between the fights where I was on and the fights where I was off, and then it's kind of comes down to like lining up a few cooldowns, right? Because it's like I do good pack burst, right? And so it's like if I do it right, things really sing and really feel like I'm really like jamming out on like killing mobs. And then if I'm a little bit off, it feels like, oh, that didn't go so right. Oh, I didn't quite get my flying guillotine right. Oh, my bone dust brew didn't quite hit the way I wanted it to. But yeah, but otherwise, like, but that's also like a good kind of like window for training stuff. I really like Diurna. I think, like I said, I think she might be my favorite fight of the raid. Yeah.
You also had some of the big chase loot, like Manic Grief Torch, right?
Oh yeah. True.
You ended up using Storm Eater's Boon and Manic Grief Torch, is that right?
That is what I currently have. Yeah.
Okay. Do you like those trinkets? Are they fun?
I love Manic Grief Torch. Storm Eater's Boon is one of those that's like fun and like fun to abuse mechanics with, right? It's like, oh, I can do this and not have to worry about certain mechanics because I can't move either way, right? Like there's like 3 bosses that works with. There's Dathia herself, there's Senarth, and Razagath, right? Like it gets good utility there, but it's also like can be potentially fucking dangerous, right? Like I would occasionally, like in council, sometimes it used to be like, oh, am I going to fuck the entire raid because like a lightning thing dumps on me and I can't get out? Didn't manage to happen, but I like lived in fear of that sometimes. Also occasionally, like, so the way I macro it is like I have both my trinkets on one macro, and occasionally the Storm Eater's Boon would come out when I meant for the Grief Torch to come out, and then I was like, well, I'm standing here for 10 seconds out of range of everything, right?
Yeah, I mean the original version of Storm Eater's Boon increased your melee range to 30 yards. So
Really?
even if people like walked out, you could still get your melee damage in, but it got redesigned to not do that.
Yeah.
Which, to be honest, I like the Storm Eater's Boon might be my favorite. I don't know what I think is my favorite like trinket of the raid. I wasn't using very many of them because most of my trinkets came from Mythic Plus, but the thing I liked about Manic Grief Torch, about Storm Eater's Boon, is that it is Razagath says, like, this is a dangerous power, it's gonna kill you, right? And so the nature of like, oh, I popped it in a thing, and now a swirly is right under me, and I'm fucking dead, right? Like, I think that's actually pretty funny and pretty good trinket design, all things considered.
I agree. No, it's super. Like, it didn't stop me from using it, right? It's super fun. Yeah. So should we move on to Razagath? I guess.
It's the big baddie Razagath. Last week did I say this? Did I say Razagath might be the hardest heroic boss since Azshara, who I think was the hardest heroic boss I've ever fought? I don't know if I can stand by that statement after Tuesday. What did you think? How hard was Razagath compared to some of the other AOTC bosses we've done?
So I kind of want to say that like I didn't feel like she was harder than any of the Shadowlands ending bosses, and maybe I'm using difficulty in a different manner, but like I still meme on this. It's like we still haven't gotten our second heroic Denathrius kill, right? I think we did at some point. I just like memeing about it, but like that fight required a lot. So I don't know. Like, I think this fight might be mechanically harder, but like has less fatigue problems, right? Like it felt like with Denathrius, every time you got downstairs and you got all the way to the end step and you failed, it was like so demoralizing, right? Because like I feel like the fight kind of ramped up in difficulty. I think Razageth, that final phase is actually not that hard mechanically, and I think that's actually good because like um Lou says in the chat we only cleared it after she was mega nerfed. When was she nerfed? Like
I wouldn't say that she was mega nerfed. Some of the healing checks were made a little bit easier.
okay.
But like I feel like in Shadowlands we were seeing a lot of like max health cuts, right? You know, it's pretty typical, I feel like, for the end boss to get a round of nerfs before we would end up getting there.
Yeah. That's fair. The what do I say? The jailer was a jailer like so with I know with Sylvanas in particular, right? Like that fight was just so fucking brutal to like get through the first phase and then get through the second phase and like not really having an opportunity to practice that final phase, which is like the hardest phase of the whole thing. I feel like, and then like die and be like, well, I guess we got to go through 10 minutes of fighting to get back there, right?
Yeah, I think that is the ultimate sin of Sylvanas. Was the hardest phase was the third phase. Whereas with Razageth, once you got to the third phase, it's actually kind of the easiest phase to deal with.
Easiest mechanically, but like it still holds the franticness of like, oh, you're against a ticking clock, right? You need to get this done before like the whole.
Yeah, I do think that is the majesty of Razageth, is that the nature of that ticking clock. It's actually the same thing as Denathrius also had this, right? When you get to the third phase of Denathrius and he kind of walls off the thing and he is now cutting out corners of the room, right? So you have less and less room to kind of like deal with stuff. That ramping feeling of we have to kill him right now or he's going to kill us, right, is really exciting and really satisfying to kind of like fight against.
I agree with that. I think that the Denathrius final phase had like a couple too many things going on that it felt like it always felt super fucking frantic, right? Like it felt like we were always like, you know, one step away from like totally wiping, whereas like Razageth felt a little bit more forgiving in that final phase, right? Like you had those like one step from failing kind of things, but they tended to be a little bit earlier on, right? Like I feel like it was. I feel like the first phase was the hardest, kind of like from like a kind of like everything you have to do like, you know, from like a by, you know, like what's like an absolute fail versus an absolute win, right? Like there are certain mechanics that are like, if you don't do well enough over the course of time, you will fail the run. There's certain mechanics like if you don't do this mechanic well right now, you're fucked, right? And I feel like those mechanics were like front weighted in Razageth, and I like that better because it's like, oh, you have to learn through that stuff. Yeah. Lou in the chat is saying that 20% nerfs aren't insignificant, especially given our raids issues, which I guess is fair.
So I do agree with that, but like a 20% nerf to a couple of abilities to make healing checks easier is different to me than Anduin losing entire mechanics, right? And getting his health cut, right? You know, the heroic jailer getting his health cut by 10%, right? I feel like those things are more meaningful nerfs than Razageth's sort of one-time 20% health nerfs. Or not health nerfs, healing check nerfs.
DPS check too. Did they reduce the
to be fair, I don't remember what specifically was nerfed. I was thinking about them, you know, like the abilities or whatever. I was thinking about them in terms of them being, you know, like damage, like the amount of damage that stuff was doing. We're gonna be nerfs. we're nerfed.
Fair. You know, I also don't heal, so I don't know what those issues were.
Okay, I have now looked it up because Lou continues to make this point. It was electric lash damage, volatile current damage, lingering charge periodic damage, and then the storm surge absorb shield was reduced by 20%. So 3 of those are healing check nerfs. 1 of those is a DPS check nerf.
Okay, that's fair. Hello, Charles. We were talking about WoW.
What's up, Charles?
But Lou, we appreciate your healing, or at least I appreciate your healing. I won't speak for Baron. So
I no one on the planet Earth appreciates Lou's healing more than me because I've been with it the longest. Okay, you guys, I won't have anyone disparage my appreciation of Lou's healing.
yeah. No, I mean I can also see like I don't know what the rest of our healer core looks like. I know that like friend of the cast Kexty, came back recently and has generally been under leveled for the fight. And so I can't imagine we had like I know we've been fooling around with like the number of healers a fair amount, right? To kind of get things to work, because I know that not all of our healer core is the most cooperative, maybe is the way to put it.
Yeah, I mean we had 4 healers, 2 of whom I think were very strong, and 2 of whom are kind of middling, not as strong.
Yeah, I mean to be
Because we
fair to
had Brood Bolt.
Kexty's like I know that I'm not the greatest, right? Like, so he's coming in new, but you who like what Riago you're saying is
Yeah. Druid Bowl is was healing on that fight. It was Krillin, Druid Bowl, Kexty, and Lou for our kill.
Yeah. You know. Yeah.
Did you ever get any of the Razageth loot?
I don't know. What was
I got
Razageth?
1 piece of gear from Razageth, which was the Desperate Invoker's Codex, which is actually a pretty cool piece of gear. It's a trinket that the cooldown on it gets reduced every time you cast a spell, but it deals damage to the target and it deals damage to you. And the more spells you cast, the lower the cooldown gets, but also the more damage it does to you, which I think is pretty sweet. Just sort of as like a I don't know, like a trinket that has this sort of meaning to it, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like there was Spiteful Storm, maybe was the only other one. I don't remember if there are any other.
Yeah, do I have anything that I got? I don't recognize any of these. Maybe the headpiece, but I also want to transform the headpiece. Yeah. I'm not eligible for like a lot of that loot too, right? Like the like I can't get the 2-handed axe.
Yeah, I did get that 2-handed axe actually on my very first time walking chest, or not time walking, the mythic, like the mythic thingy chest. I got this huge buff of a 411 axe on like the 3rd week of the expansion.
Oh, well.
But anyway, where does Vault of the Incarnates fall in terms of like your overall raids?
I don't know. I enjoyed it. I kind of don't really keep the other like a ton of raids in my head in terms of like how I evaluate them.
Sure.
I don't know. I found it very satisfying. It's probably my favorite of the recent ones, just because like I found like Sylvanas. I just found like so annoying as a boss. Kind of like soured me on a lot of the raid. What would the other ones be? Like I said, there's a lot of multi-target opportunity, which is always good for monks and something I enjoy. So that elevates it above other ones. I don't know. I think it's my favorite of the recent ones, but like I also wouldn't interrogate that too deeply. What are your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting. I like a lot of the story stuff. It reminds me of Battle for Dazar lore, which is actually probably one of my favorite raids of all time. Maybe I would say the best raid in like modern WoW history. Maybe the Nighthold is the best raid in modern WoW history. The thing about Battle for Desire Lord that was really great was the story that progressed through it was really tangible and fun. And I think that's something that is a real strength for Vault of the Incarnates, kind of as like sort of what we ended up talking about. But I don't know. Some of the boss fights were I feel like most of the boss fights were like fine, but there's something that like really stood out to me, right? For instance, oh no, I want to say Hadronox. That's not the right one. What's the crab in
Yeah, no, I know what you're.
Sepulchre? Yeah, what a great fight. You know what I mean? Like that
Yeah.
is a tremendously good fight, right? Just really well designed in every aspect, right? But I don't think there's anything that's on that caliber here. I don't even think there's anything on the caliber of like Kel'Thuzad. I don't know. I don't know what did I say for Castle Nathria? What are the good fights in Castle Nathria? I really like the chain guy, whatever his name was, but it's maybe the most memorable fight for me. But it's just like I don't know how much I'm going to be thinking about this raid in a couple of
Yeah.
in a couple of months. It'll probably sort of like fade from my memory a little bit. So yeah, pretty good overall. I had a very good time because of class design. I think is probably the thing I would say about it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, we're in overtime, so we can start going into other stuff. But, buddy, you have failed to do the quest line for like the 4th or 5th time at this point.
True, I know. I am a fucking loser, so it's fine. Let's
Yep.
get on with it.
So, a vague synopsis of this is you, spoilers for the Dragon Scale Expedition quest line. At the very last step of it is you get into this vault and you walk in and you essentially go through a bunch of like museum exhibits and like essentially Tyr has put a bunch of samples of primalist dragons in the vault. There's some question as to why he was doing this, right? My prediction, and this is going to be the big twist, is that Tyr actually created, like, this is my guess, Tyr actually created the primalists, and like the primal incarnates, and they were like his failed first draft. And that's what we're going to find out, that this thing that they are raging against is in fact also their creator. And that is my big prediction for the end of for the progression of Dragonflight.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
so we're also resurrecting Tyr, right? In the other plot line, right?
Maybe.
Have you done that one with the silver scale?
Are we resurrecting him, or will we be like on?
I don't know. That is I'm speculating, right? But you find this special silver scale, you plug it into the machine,
Right.
and the machine spits out an empty Tyr body, right? And then also you get his memories. His memories exist, but I don't know that you don't actually talk to him or anything like that. You are sent to Uldaman to go get his memories.
Oh, in the discs, yeah. All right, yeah, well, I can see that.
So that is a pretty interesting thing. I don't know how I feel about this, to be honest with you. This stuff with sort of like the Titan Keepers. It is funny to me because people sort of railed against some aspects of the Shadowlands plot being kind of like too cosmic, right? Like dealing with these gods essentially. But I kind of feel like the exact same thing is happening with like this Tyr stuff. And I sort of feel like weirdly unmoored because there's no Sylvanas. This is going to sound absolutely buck wild to anyone who cares about this stuff at all, but it's just like in previous expansions, there's a real strong emotional anchor, right? In Battle for Azeroth, it is Sourfang, it's Jaina, right? In Shadowlands, it is Sylvanas and Anduin, right? Where the thing I'm really invested in are these super long running characters, also Tyrande, by the way, these super long running characters who are, relatable, and I like them and I want stuff to happen, right? I don't have a similar sort of connection to really any of the characters in Dragonflight, it feels like. Because it's like Alex Traza, I guess. Nosdormu I like. because I like this thing that they're doing with him, which is his you know, he understands that he is destined to go insane and become Murmazond and like fight for everything that he hates, right? But you know, I don't know. I just don't feel as connected to the story in Dragonflight as I did to previous expansions, and I feel like it's because I'm lacking that like core sort of emotional anchor.
Yeah, well, I mean,
So
the kind of like pure heartstrings character you hate, right? Which is Calicos. Um,
that's true. I do hate Calicos because he's such a fucking loser and he bothers me so much.
um, yeah, no, I also like, I will say that like a lot of the more interesting parts of the plot kind of like got like, you kind of like just do and you're done with right early on, right? Like,
Hmm.
I think the Sibelian Rathion dynamic is an interesting thing that hopefully they'll explore more. But like
Yeah.
all of the like plot points around that, like I feel like I was done within like the first week, right? Um
Yeah, that's
uh
very true.
I think that like um and I I think the prediction is I don't know if it's going to happen in this expansion, but whenever those Dormu goes to change, Chromie is going to prevent it from happening because that's like pretty obviously foreshadowed, right? Like, um, what else? What else? I don't know. I think I get where you're coming from. Doesn't
Here's my big tinfoil, I will say. I did not know it was in this vault because I hadn't done that quest line, but if it is true that it is sort of I'm sorry, can you just explain what is in the vault? Is it copies?
so it's like there's like it's been a little while since I've done it, but um there's like proto like elemental infused like proto drake whelps that are like in like glass bulbs, and some of them have escaped, and that's like the gameplay part of it, right? Is you have to like get them back into like stasis bubbles.
But the question is, why are they there?
Yeah, there's like that's part of the mystery. Is like one of the explorers says like, oh, why are they there? Um, and like my theory is that Tyr made them, right? And the elemental, the primalists or the elemental whatever incarnates are like Tyr's failing, right? Like Tyr's first draft in a failure. Um,
Okay, I think I am on board with that. The thing I was thinking about was I think we're gonna get a new Dragonflight. This is my prediction. At the end of this expansion, we're gonna get a new Dragonflight. I don't know what it is. It's gonna be like the white Dragonflight, the gold Dragonflight. You could do a million of these. Um, but I think there's gonna be a new Dragonflight. And the elemental stuff makes me think maybe the new Dragonflight will be like led by one of the incarnates, like maybe Viranath, who's the ice incarnate. Um, like Aridikron, who, by the way, I love the elemental incarnates in their like villain personas. I think that shit is sweet as hell. And Aridikron has this amazing Magneto vibe to him that I am just salivating for, basically.
which one
But
is
I feel like
Ridicron?
Aridikron is the Earth one.
Okay.
Fyrak is like the next um patch is sort of about Fyrak. He is clearly like absolutely crazy, right? Iridikron is the leader. He has that sort of like dark, brooding mastermind, very Lex Luthor sort of vibes. But Viranath doesn't really have anything yet. And I think it would be kind of neat if, there is some minor redemption arc and there is a version of things where, like Viranath rebels against the other incarnates, joins up with the aspects, becomes the aspect of the white dragonflight, right? Which is a new dragonflight of elemental proto drakes or something like that, right? Like, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it, but I think that would be sweet.
Yeah, that would be neat. I am the thing that always kind of like sticks in my mind about like the dragon fights in general is they are like so deterministic about like who they are. It's like if you're like a blue proto whelp or a blue whelp, right? And you're like, I think this time stuff is neat. I want to be a bronze dragon when I grow up. Like, no, fuck you. You're studying magic, right?
Yeah.
Like, which like I could see them doing a kind of like, you know, vaguely Jedi-esque kind of like the dragon fights need to be less rigid and more flexible type of thing, where it's like not that they're the bad guys, but like they still have like lessons to learn, right?
Yeah.
Like type of deal. I could see them doing something like that. But that's also like who knows?
Who knows?
I am most excited for Pirate Hosen, which is in this current patch. So um, I want Hosen to be an allied race.
Hey, they could do it. We're doing heritage armor again, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yep. All right. Well, that's basically all the WoW stuff to talk about, right? Do you have anything else WoW-wise you want to talk about?
Nope. I am on board. What else have you been up to?
All right, so I've got a bunch of stuff. First, and we'll get this out of the way, is I played a fair amount of Zoetti over the weekend. We're going to do a whole episode on that next week.
Can I actually ask, what is your playtime right now?
Let me pop it up real quick. Probably like 3 or 4 hours, I guess.
Okay. I'm at 57 hours on Steam alone, which doesn't include all of the build stuff that I was doing before it got onto Steam proper. So
5.4 hours.
Okay.
I will say that it was fun to play. So the big thing I did is over the weekend I went up north to Hanover, which is where Dartmouth is located, but totally unrelated to Dartmouth. There was a miniatures-based con in a hotel, which was super fun. And in between my game sessions, I would play Zoetti on my Steam Deck. That was a good thing. I would appreciate it, and obviously this is not me asking you for this, but it would be nice if there was a little bit more optimization for work with the Steam Deck, right? Like the little button in the upper right-hand corner that you click to switch out your skills is so small that it's hard to tap with my finger. But
okay, well,
yeah.
That's useful feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, but it is a fun game to play. Like it feels like a natural thing for the Steam Deck, right? Like I just kind of tap on cards and push them up, and most of the time it just kind of works and it's magical and it's nice. But the big thing to talk about there is the actual con. I had not been into a lot of miniatures-based stuff. I didn't even play a ton of Warhammer or whatever, or Warhammer 40K. But this kind of whole subgenre of games that I would say are kind of to Warhammer 40K, what kind of the more mechanics like Mask of the Luchador is to D&D, right? Where it's there are rules, but they're a little bit more light. There's a kind of a core rule set, and the team's a variation of the rules rather than every kind of army having intricate rules on their own. So I played, what did I play? I played 3 different games, systems over the course of the weekend. I played Pulp Alley, which is a kind of interwar period set type of narrative-ish game. Obviously, it's miniatures based with a lot of mechanics, but it's there was a team of gumshoes, a team of policemen, a team of Indiana Jones-esque explorers, and a team of communists. And then there was a team of aviators, Charles Lindbergh kind of looking aviators, or Rocketeer inspired aviators, all from that interwar period. And there's an evil genius with stroking a cat that's causing havoc in the town, and you move your miniatures around and you shoot at each other, and you kind of fill in the details as you're overcoming challenges or whatever. And it was a good time, right? It's kind of supposed to be a B movie, right? There's one player who's the director who chooses what order players go in, and then the director rules pass around. It was super fun. I really enjoyed it. Very flavorful, very neat. It's a lot of fun, and I very much enjoyed it. Next game I played was a game called Frostgraves, which is basically a generic kind of fantasy game designed to be played with any miniatures you have, right? You've got a wizard and an apprentice, and then a handful of soldiers, and you move around a battlefield and you try and grab treasure. And just a nice kind of streamlined, some tactical depth, but rule fun, you have half a dozen spells that you can cast as your character. Kind of swingy, a lot of stuff is based on a D20 roll, but fun and lighthearted and super enjoyable. Just kind of some good fun, easy to pick up, a type of thing that I would consider setting up in say Roll20 or
Sure.
Forge or something, Foundry, just to kind of play and a thing that you can kind of teach people and play a whole session, a handful of hours. Um, and then I did a painting class, which was super fun. I forgot to bring my miniatures in so I could show you how I went from like absolutely abysmal to like merely terrible. But
Yeah.
but the guy teaching the class is like a guy who lives up there who like does minis on commission. And he like basically was like telling us all these like super, giving us tips and tricks on how to do things. Um, and that was super fun. Like a lot of it's just kind of like putting hours in. I met some cool people. And the last one I sent you a picture of this. This is like custom jousting game that some dude who actually like lives not super far from me. I might join their club for games at some point. But he like has like these like knights that are like in like they're like bigger knights. They're like like that scale instead of like most minis are like that scale. These minis were like this scale. They're like knights on horses. And it's like came up with a rule system to have them joust against each other. And it was that was just like a cool, fun thing to do. Some dude who clearly cared a lot about like making this like medieval jousting thing. It's like, oh, you pick your tilt, you pick where you're targeting, you like roll horsemanship checks, and you're trying to unseat your opponent. And yeah, that was just like, it was just super fun to see someone's passion project like that. On top of all this fun stuff, like I said, I met some cool people. There was a streamer with Extra Life who was there, like raffling off stuff. I won like a Judge Dredd set. That guy's name is, I believe his handle is Vermont Gamer. He's like a variety streamer on Twitch. But he was super cool. The con organizer was super cool. This is like I've gone to a couple different small cons. This one was like really cozy, right? Like, you get, you make friends quickly. You see people walking around, it's like, hey, Jim, like, I haven't seen you in forever, right? Like saying, old friends meeting, that type of stuff. So I love these kind of small, like, I have really become a big fan of these small kind of regional cons, and I'm hoping to go to a couple more of them this year. But, like, PAX is super fun, but like, I'm not really like making friends at PAX, right? Like I'm meeting up with you guys and like it's a huge con with like, thousands of people. Same thing with Gen Con. But like, these small cons, like it's hard to like not like get to know people, especially since there's like, you're one at a table with 6 people in like a half dozen game or half dozen to a dozen games per session. It was a good time. Very good time. Highly recommend it. It was called Mayhem Con for anybody looking to go next year. They've already scheduled it. So if you're in New England, I would highly recommend Mayhem Con. I might try and drag friends of the con, Sarian and Ray, to it next year if I can convince them. That's part of the thing too. Is like the smaller cons are also like a weekend pass for PAX is like hundreds of dollars. This con was $30 a day or $60 for the weekend, right? And none of the events cost anything, right? Like it's much more doable.
Yeah, that is a very satisfying feeling. I feel like going to one of the small cons is not like breaking the bank open in order to do that.
Yeah. Only other thing to mention is I put a little bit of time into the Street Fighter 6. A demo drop for PlayStation 4 and 5. The Steam version is coming in a couple of days, actually. Steam and Xbox. But I put a little bit of time just to get my fingers on the mechanics. Feels great. Very much looking forward to the full release. Buddy, how was your week?
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's funny because I made such a huge deal out of not playing Chorfs last week because I thought they came out at a different point. And I still haven't touched it. And the reason why is because I'm pretty deep into StarCraft 2 right now, and I'm just like, I'm just gonna finish StarCraft 2. I have a bunch of different games that I'm sort of in the middle of. One of which is Pathfinder Kingmaker. I want to beat Kingmaker before going to Wrath of the Righteous. But I really want to play Wrath of the Righteous. And Kingmaker is definitely like a lot of fun. And I am like the worst person for it because the game has so much stuff and I want to do all of it that like I am. And the game has mechanics for if you are not doing the main quest fast enough, it starts punishing you. And I'm just like, I don't care. Fuck it. I'm just going to do these stupid side quests because like there are nodes on the map, Mango, and I have to clear them all out. I have to visit all of them or else my brain will break, right? I just have to get to the other side of this thing. And there's all this stuff about like managing your kingdom. And like, I just kind of want to sit there and city build a little bit, right? All this stuff. It's super dumb. But I am, chipping away at Pathfinder Kingmaker. The main game that I've been playing is StarCraft 2. I beat the Wings of Liberty campaign for like the millionth time. God, StarCraft story is so good, Mango. I know I have said this a million times, but like, oh, and for some reason, it's just really affecting me this time around. I like practically cried. Um, in the beginning of Heart of the Swarm, right? You probably don't remember these plot points. In Wings of Liberty, most of your time is spent building a resistance, a rebellion as Rainer's Raiders, and you're rebelling against the Dominion, right? Which is run by Emperor Mengsk. He is a douchebag. He's the guy who left Kerrigan on New Gettysburg to be infested by the Zerg and turned into the Queen of Blades, right? He's a huge piece of shit. But there's a twist because you find out that, you know, you're doing these missions to get these artifacts, and you find out that you can use those artifacts to de-infest Kerrigan, right? And so instead of using his momentum to launch the campaign to dethrone Mengsk that he has always asked to do, right? Instead, Raynor redirects all of his forces to the Zerg homeworld of Char, the center of Kerrigan's power. She confronts her there. He sets off this artifact and he successfully de-infests her, right? And then in the start of Heart of the Swarm, they're together, they're fighting, they have this banter. It's amazing. She gives him a little kiss as like guys are attacking or whatever, but then, oh no, she gets cut off from Raynor. He can't get out. And then she goes to the rendezvous where they had planned to meet, and she sees a news broadcast from Emperor Mengsk that he was captured and executed. And she's so furious that she goes to the homeworld, like the birthplace of the Zerg, and reinfests herself and turns herself back into the Queen of Blades in order to get her revenge on Emperor Mengsk. And it's just like, oh, it's too good. I can't deal with how much I love it. I think part of it is that I'm a romantic at heart, really. I've talked about my love of Titanic, right? How I think Titanic is like a really strong, like a really good movie. And I was recently like obsessed with it or whatever. I think that's part of what this is. And StarCraft 2 is a very rare male-centered romance, right? It is fundamentally a melodrama that is not about that is not about women, it's about men. It is about Raynor, right? At least in that beginning portion that I was like talking about or whatever. Like the idea of like a guy who is so in love with you know, his ex that he throws away his entire, like he throws away everything just at the chance that he can be with her again. Like, what a romantic melodramatic thing, right? I don't think anybody ever would think of StarCraft 2 in those terms except for fucking me. But whatever. And then I've just kind of been doing upkeep on other games, right? I've been doing my Overwatch 2 dailies, which to be honest, I'm having a weird amount of fun with, and I want to try. I simultaneously want to recruit people to play Overwatch 2 with, but I think that if I did, I would have less fun with the game. Because it would give people a chance to sort of like rage or whatever. Basically, all I'm doing is I'm logging in, I'm doing these dailies, and I'm logging out for the day. But like, I don't know, it's just like really satisfying, especially in a game where I'm playing with randos and I'm carrying. There's just like not a lot of feeling. There's not a lot of other feelings in the world that are as satisfying as that thing of like getting a bunch of randos to go, wow, that was a really great ultimate, right? Or a really sweet play or whatever else. And then obviously Hearthstone is in there. I'm told there are buffs on the way. Warrior is at the worst win rate that it's been in a long time, and it's still not the worst win rate deck in the game. Mage is worse. So you know, we'll see with the patch, which I'm pretty sure is going to drop tomorrow, has to offer. That's it. That's all the stuff that I've been thinking about doing. All that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Oh, I did want to shout out something that is like not games related. I listened to. Do you know who John Ronson is?
Not offhand.
No, Ron Johnson or John Ronson. Hold on, let me make sure I get the dude's name right because I feel
Ron Johnson, the United States Senator.
No, Who is what? Hold on, give me one
The
second.
British journalist?
Yes, John Ronson. So he's done a handful of things. I think he like wrote the book "So You've Been Canceled" or something about that woman who like tweeted like, going to Africa,
Oh my god. Wow. He's the guy who made the Men Who Stare at Goats book.
did he? I did not realize
Yeah,
that.
apparently, yeah.
So funnily enough, I also have a comment about that. So I will get to that in a second, but he's done a handful of podcasts. He did It All Fell Apart, which is kind of like examining the beginnings of certain culture war stuff, like how effectively like the abortion issue used to be like a very Catholic thing, and it only became like an evangelical Protestant thing after like basically some dude wanted to like gin up a film reel, and his father was like a preacher, right? Super interesting stuff. But he did this thing. So this is wild. Do you remember the Timothy McVeigh bombings? They happened when we were in like elementary school.
Oh yeah, I mean he's the Unabomber, right?
No, he's not. That's like I realized after listening to this that I was wrong. Like,
oh, the Oklahoma City bombing. Okay,
yeah. I realized I kind of merged Unabomber and hit in my head, but they're different.
Yeah, I also merged both of these guys in my head. Okay, but I do know this guy because he's the guy who was mad about all of the right wing like he talks about Ruby Ridge and Waco as
yeah. So Waco.
Yeah.
So essentially, his origin story is Waco happens, and basically the United States government, kills a bunch of kids, right? Like Waco is Ruby Ridge and Waco are complicated. It doesn't mean the people involved are good people, but
yeah, I mean, who's the Waco guy? Absolutely a child rapist, right? But also probably did not deserve to burn to death.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he shot himself.
Yeah. Lou making a face because Lou is from Oklahoma, but I assume
Ooh, oh my god, I didn't think about that.
yeah. Also, she would have been, no offense, but she would have been like older to really process like what was happening there, right? Like, I kind of didn't understand when it was happening, but anyway, John Ronson has made this podcast on Audible. It's an Audible original. It's like 6 episodes. You can go listen to the whole thing right now. Called The Debutante, which is about this woman, Carol Howe, I think is her name. Who
She faked being a billionaire. Is that right?
No. So
okay, never mind. I'm sorry. I thought I was thinking.
Carol Howe's parents were. She was adopted, but her adopted parents were very affluent, and she was like, "No, you're thinking of somebody else completely different." So one of the conspiracy theories about the Oklahoma City bombing is whether or not there was a second guy that helped him with it, right? And Carol Howe is this person who goes through a bunch of shit, becomes a neo-Nazi, becomes an informant for the ATF, and it's this city of Elohim, I think. It's like this like big white supremacist Christian nationalist thing. Turns informant for the ATF, gets like kind of like goes out of her mind, gets deactivated, maybe like associates with a different white supremacist group, like turns around again, and like then when she goes to trial claims that she thought she was never deactivated because like they like the ATF like basically washed their hands of her, right? And like she was apparently like terrified for her life, and so like there's a whole bunch of nonsense there. But like the conspiracy theory is that she maybe knew enough that if somebody had listened to her, that the Oklahoma City bombing could have been averted. And there's a lot of there's a lot of there that isn't there. I highly recommend listening to the series to get like the full picture, right? Because John Ronson goes through it very methodically, digs up all the evidence. There is this heartbreaking story where this woman who is the grandmother of two of the kids who were killed. So part of the tragedy of the Oklahoma City bombing, not that it was, not a tragedy by any stretch of the imagination, but like there was a daycare on the second floor and all of the kids there died, right? And one of the grandmothers of two of these boys that were killed is like basically is like wants to make sure that everybody who was involved gets punished. And so there's this story about this associate that person number 2 who nobody can figure out who it is. So they go through things and like maybe it's a person associated with this this city of Elohim. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's got something to do with Carol Howe, and it's all kind of mixed up. And how much of this is like no one listened to her because she was like a shrill, crazy woman, right? Like how much is she just a crazy person? How much is she a liar? How much are any of the people involved? Like there is, what's his name? Andy the German is the guy's name. He's like this German dude who like is involved, may have been tangentially associated with Timothy McVeigh, or Tim Tuttle is just like one of his aliases. Manages to just like kind of leave the country without anybody stopping him. And like maybe he's associated with like a German politician, but it turns out that German politician isn't very prominent. It's just kind of like isn't really a there, but like, you know, especially like back before you can just kind of like Google things, right? Like, you know, it's like, oh, I heard he's related to a German politician. Was he an informant that like, you know, basically like was evacuated to keep from embarrassing the FBI and the ATF? Probably not, but like John Ronson does the legwork of going through everything. He manages to get his hands on like previously unreleased like recordings of answering machines, stuff where this woman was interacting with like this crazy dude who's like the head of this white supremacist church. And like, you know, they ran in kind of the same circles as Timothy McVeigh, but how much they actually intersected is kind of like up in the air. But I highly recommend it. It was a ride. I listened to the whole thing today, actually, right? Like I was listening to, he like went on a podcast that I listened to talk about it, and the person's like, stop this podcast and go listen to it. It's like, okay, I got the time, I'll go do that. I listened to podcasts 2 times speed, so it was like an hour and a half. Totally worth it, totally entrancing. I don't know if you need an Audible subscription to listen to it, but I would recommend it if you
I do have an Audible subscription. I've been listening to Conflicted. Do you know that the book Conflict is Not Abuse?
No, I'm not.
Conflict is Not Abuse is a wildly important book, in my opinion, to understanding most of current like culture war shit, right? Because it basically talks about how everyone thinks they're, everybody says this. Everybody thinks that they're the good guy, right? Everybody thinks that they're, you know, kind of the hero of their own story or whatever. But it talks about how the thing that creates bullies is overstatement of harm, right?
Yeah.
And the way people will, you know, so for instance, a white supremacist, the way a white supremacist is sort of born, right? Is is they feel like an anxiety or an insecurity, and the thing that relieves them of that, right, is outwardly projecting and being aggressive towards kind of other people, right? The book talks about the way in which, you know, like it's not they're not chanting white power at Charlottesville. They're chanting Jews will not replace us, right? It is this defensive posture, right? It's this thing of we're being attacked and we need to fight back, because there's this intrinsic sort of human thing about if I'm attacked, I am allowed to defend myself, right? But I can't just go out. I can't attack somebody else, right? I have to make them out to be abusive, essentially. Um, and I don't know, it's popped up a bunch. It pops up a bunch because people talk about it. Like it popped up in ContraPoints videos. It's popped up in a couple of like Destiny streams recently. It's popped up in the way people talk about kind of like, you know, oh, the left is eating itself, right? Like people making why I left the left videos, right? Because someone who is nominally a, you know, like a part of the online left gets canceled or something kind of along those lines, even though that all this stuff is sort of like dumb and not real or whatever. But it basically explains and understands that phenomenon of how does a, you know, person with 70 followers on Twitter, right, get under the skin of the J.K. Rowlings of the world, right? Of YouTubers and streamers, right? And how does it motivate their thoughts? Because they internalize this conflict, right, as abuse, and it creates trauma inside of them, and it completely warps their ability to interact with the world, because they are essentially deluded into the power of, you know, whoever it is that they have chosen to fight against, right? Anyway, that's what I've been listening to, and it's also a trip.
Yeah. So when you're done with that, I would recommend The Revolt of the Public by Martin Gurry, which is kind of a lot about the same stuff, but it's like more specifically focused on the kind of like the youth movements that kind of just like are brimming with energy and like tearing stuff down, but like don't really have a goal to build stuff up. But it's another kind of book that kind of like runs in those kinds of circle stuff. I need to re-listen to that too because I have that in Audible as well. But I will.
Yeah, I have like a million things on Audible. I mean, I don't know, like The Authoritarians was a big one. I listened to it. Did you do that? Do you know that one?
No, I'm not familiar.
Oh, that one's a trip. I don't know. You would probably hate it because I I don't know, maybe you wouldn't hate it. The Authoritarians is an academic who basically does a bunch of sociological research onto sort of kind of far right people and how far right people engage in politics and how they they work. It's written by a guy whose name I don't even fucking remember. Bob Altermeyer is like the guy. But it basically is just it is a commonly cited thing for liberals, and it is a commonly derided thing for conservatives, but it is also a like it's also scientific, right? And there's this question of, okay, is this real science? Which is what, you know, someone who is a defender of the book would say. This is real science, really getting in deep and understanding the psychology and the sociology of conservative movements that are, you know, building towards whatever. And there is the question of, is it like what's the guy, Peter Boghossian or whatever, the guy
Oh,
who
the
tricked
so-called
the
squared.
yeah, you know, he tricked all of these academic journals into taking bullshit papers or whatever because he kind of revealed that nobody really actually read the fine print. They just
Yeah.
kind of rubber stamped bullshit. It's like, what is this a version of that, right? I would obviously say it isn't, but I thought it was super interesting.
Yeah. No,
And
I mean, a lot of that stuff comes down to also like methodology, right? Like I
yeah.
was reading about like a study that was like, um, you know, that thought that like maybe like the report purported to claim that like right wing people were more subservient to authority because when you ask them like it was like the question that they asked was like if you were cast in a play with your father and you had to cut your father, would you do it? Right. And the right wing people were more likely to say that they wouldn't. And it's like that feels like a stretch to extrapolate from that response that they are more subservient to authority, right? And you know, so like sociology is just like the way I've heard it described is like interesting, but like less rigorous than people want to imagine it to be. Just like as a science, right? Like you know, the big book in the sociology space is Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, right?
Yep.
And it like fails to like even like kind of explore and to be fair to what it came out, I think in the '90s, like fails to how we've replaced third places with like online communities, right? Like that's feeling a lot
Yep.
of
It's a 1995 book.
yeah. And so like, that book's about the death of third places, right? Like, death of like the bowling alone is like the titular bowling alone is bowling clubs, churches, other intermediate civic institutions, I believe is the formal term for it. But at least like for you and me, we've replaced that a lot with like our Discord servers, right? Like,
Yep.
Yeah,
I mean, I would say I'm more connected to my third community, right, than your first or second community. Your first community is your family. I'm more connected to my third community than my first community, right? In terms of who I spend most of my time, money and power with, right?
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, that's it's a whole thing.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Another streamer that's around. Have I ever told you about Not So Erudite? Do you know
I'm
Erudite?
not familiar now.
She's just another streamer, but she's not a psychologist. She has like a weird, she's like a psychometrician or something, but basically like a psychologist, right? And one of her big things is, talking about papers and methodology and how stuff works. Because coming at it from a non-academic perspective, you lose a lot of those sort of like details in the weeds. She hates like these like red pill idiots or whatever. So she makes lots of kind of academically rigorous counter arguments to that community and movement or whatever. but that's one of her big things, right? Is that, methodology matters a lot, and the way that people, target some of these papers and studies and their research can just kind of be flawed on the outset just because they're kind of asking the wrong questions. Like when she talks about these red pill guys, there is an underrepresentation of men in these sorts of things, and she talks about how, like, because the field itself is dominated by women, um, and there's a lot of sort of internal bias towards the way that questions are asked about men. They produce really skewed and kind of damning results about men that are like bad, right? That are bad science in a way. And how that bad science then leads to bad social movements because these red pill dinguses sort of pick up on this shit, right? And carry it to their extremes, which are,
That
bad.
Yeah.
We'll just leave it at
No,
that.
I mean, like, what's like the replication crisis is a thing, right? Like the Stanford prison experiment, the famous Stanford prison experiment probably doesn't replicate,
Oh,
right?
yeah, yeah. I did a deep dive on that like 4 or 5 years ago or whatever. That was crazy. Blew my mind because somebody told me that and I didn't believe them. I was like, "Are you kidding? Everybody talks about this thing." He was like, "Yeah, it is not real and no one like it is not like actual psychology."
Yeah, it's
And
junk
I went
science
and I
at this
looked into
point.
it and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's, I mean, that's the problem, right? It's like, it's hard, like, there's not enough incentive to replicate findings. And so, like, it takes a while to figure out that things don't replicate, right? Like, power stancing was a big one, right? Like, there's a lot of, like, so power stancing is the idea that, like, if you stand in certain ways, it will, like, subconsciously affect the way that you think and behave.
Oh
And so
my
you
god! I
can,
want you to know that the first thing that came up is Elden Ring. How to power stance weapons. Dark Souls 2. The power stance is a player ability. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go
yeah.
on.
No, but it's kind of like how, like, the way you hold yourself can subconsciously influence how you feel about things, but also influence other people, right? Like,
Oh
um,
yeah.
like
There's a guy who I met actually because I went to an event where he was speaking, and he's a researcher on lying, right? And his thing is that anyone who tells you they can understand when someone is lying and tell the truth is lying, right? Because you can't. And he has run hundreds of these experiments to try and discern what are things you can do to understand when people are lying, people are telling the truth, what are the kinds of tells that they have. And all of his research is basically saying nothing. There's nothing. You can't tell. It is impossible. And mostly at this point, he is debunking sort of bad, like self-help books or whatever, that purport that they can tell you how to, like, influence or understand when somebody is lying to you, because that's just not a thing. They can't do that.
yeah, no, I mean, so this is actually super interesting because this will bring me back to the other podcast recommendation I had, which is World's Greatest Con, which is on their 3rd season, and it's about 2 kids who basically, like, you know who Yuri Geller is?
No.
The guy who can bend spoons with his mind.
I Geller?
Yeah.
Oh, Yuri Geller. He can influence people with his mind?
No. He can bend spoons with his mind, and he can't. But like that's like the thing, right? Like, he, like, went on Johnny Carson in, like, the 60s, and, like, Johnny Carson made sure he couldn't, like, mess with this stuff, and he failed to, like, bend spoons for, like, half an hour. And Johnny's
Oh, I do know who you're talking about. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
so basically, in, like, to be the the Men Who Stare at Goats was reminded me of this, right? Because in, like, that time period, right? This is directly before the Men Who Stares at Goats. There's a lot of government funding for, like, figuring out if, like, psychic stuff is real, but this field is full of a lot of true believers, right? Do you know who James the Amazing Randy is?
Yeah, he's the guy that just, like, debunks all these people, right?
Yeah, he's a
Yeah.
magician turned skeptic, and so the world's greatest con in this case is these 2 kids who are, like, connected by James Randi, like, basically go to this research institute and fool them for, like, a period of, I think it's like a couple of years, right? Like, they just like on the spot are figuring out ways to, like, imply that they have psychic powers and they don't, and like they come out at a conference and how do you do it? Well, to be honest, we lied, or something like that, right? Like they basically like totally destroy this like entire endeavor, right? By being like we all these results that this lab has been reporting as were scientifically rigorous were faked by us, right? And it's about the fallout around all of that and like how they're involved with it and like the different personalities involved and how like basically after a while they're like these people are like their friends and they feel bad that they're like basically deceiving them. They're going to ruin their entire lives, right? Like, and James the Amazing Randy is involved and a bunch of stuff. And basically part of this is like after this happens, right? After this happens is like when like the CIA is like we weren't associated with this at all because this is what they're doing, like the men who stares at Coke stuff, and they continue to do it because like they need to know if like there's a thing that they could potentially like it's the Cold War, right? Like if the Russians can find people with ESP, we need to find them first, right? Like type of deal.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge thing. I think there's a video about this. Super Eye Patch Wolf has a video on this where it's like people who can knock other people out without touching them by like managing their chi or whatever. It's like fake martial arts basically,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And the idea is that like, oh, if you're this master of kung fu or whatever it is, right? You can knock someone to the ground without even touching them, right? And there is an MMA fighter in China who um challenges these guys to fights and he just beats their asses, right? But the Chinese government doesn't like him because he's sort of he's like he's essentially attacking these Chinese martial arts traditions, right? By essentially insisting that like modern fighting techniques are better than like ancient ones or whatever. And so there's all of this like censorship and stuff around him. This this skeptic guy who's beating these like God, now I gotta find this video because we should put it in the show notes.
Yeah, I will try to
This
remember to link
like
all of these things, but
yeah.
um but yeah, no, it's
Anyway, we have gone on so much longer and talked
yeah,
about so much random ass shit.
yeah,
Um,
at the end of the
we,
podcast.
this is the end of the podcast. Yeah.
All right. Well, if you'd like to reach out to us about any of the stuff we talked about on this podcast, you can reach us at subderspgames@gmail.com or podcast@subderspgames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/subderspgames or youtube.com/@subderspgames where these go out live. That's everything I have, buddy. You have anything you're looking to promote?
Besides my very good friend Zoetti, which is out now, and you can play it, and you can be one of the. It's funny because I have a bunch of these achievements. So because I played 60 hours of Zoetti, I have leveled up the final character Nikora the Mage to level 10, and 0.1% of players have this achievement. I think it might just be me, to be fair. And but yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty excited that the game is out and people can play it, even though it is definitely pretty difficult. I was surprised that people were having as much trouble with it on launch as they have been.
Yeah.
That's a tease. We'll do that. We'll do that
Yeah.
next week.
No,
I guess.
I will say things. Actually, I've got a question for you. I
Sure,
got
hit me.
an accessory that told me I could sell things for 250% of what I normally can. How do I fucking sell things?
I'm sorry. That is a localization typo. It means those things are 250% more expensive, I'm pretty sure. If it's the accessory I'm thinking of. Hold on. You know what? I can look it up. Because I'm pretty sure that accessory says something like it's like card draw +1. It has some other effect, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's hand size +1, I think.
Yeah, okay. So the hand size is the upside. The downside is God, man, I am never gonna be able to. There's 279 accessories in this fucking game. The downside of that accessory is that things are more expensive in the shop, right? So the next time you go to a shop, you will
Okay, because most accessories don't have downsides.
That's true. Yeah, there are some. There are obviously cursed ones. I don't know if you've seen any cursed items yet.
I've also had like I got the one that's like the soul candle. It's like draw 13.
Oh, I almost won the game with that once, but I fucking died. I actually. So the thing I'm pretty sure you can do with that one is there are invincibility potions, like a scroll of invincibility,
Oh
right, that will
yeah,
keep
yeah.
you alive. And I mistimed it. I thought I was about to do a shuffle, but I fucked it up. And so I died. And I was really mad about
So
it.
I won that run. I also didn't realize I didn't need it. I didn't realize that it didn't increase hand size as well. But like I was basically playing a build where I like pumped up my defensive performance and got armor master, and then just like pumped armor with singles, and then used like the mini flush shield bash one. It just like did like
Oh,
stupid amounts of damage.
that is you have discovered. Did you get tactical guard? The 2 pair, and it
Uh,
gives you 4 armor 3 times,
and if you upgrade enough permanent defense performance, yeah, that and the full
oh,
house one that gives you armor master. Like, yeah,
okay, so there's another full house one that I actually like better for that build. Well, we could talk about, but I just wanted to gush about this. I love that. That is my favorite thing in Zoetti. Rachel, I was talking to Rachel about it. And even though I think Alviz might be my favorite character, in terms of like all of the different ways, she was like, I feel like Valentina is more your character, and Alviz is more my character. Alviz is like an assassin, he's a rogue, right? Valentina is like a knight or whatever. And that armor build is so fun. I could play that armor build every game, basically, because I don't know, just like it is very number go up. And it's I don't know, it's just so satisfying. To like pump yourself to 200 armor and then bash them for like a gazillion damage.
yeah, no, that's fair.
God, I will never fucking find this item. There are so many items in this stupid game.
Can you not like control F for 250 or something?
There's not a find. I'm just literally in the index, right?
Oh,
Like
okay.
the game has an index, but it is not searchable. No, I bet actually I probably do have access to like some spreadsheet somewhere that would like give me the.
I don't need you to reveal secrets on stream.
Oh yeah, reveal secrets to my secret Discord server, and then like get arrested by the FBI or whatever.
Yeah, you're to your third place, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, I'm pretty sure what that means to say is that items are more expensive.
Okay.
Because if I remember correctly, it's like a common or it's like a rare accessory, and typically those accessories, you don't get hand size out of that, you don't get card draw out of that.
Okay.
But when you do it with like a small downside, because there's some other ones, right? Like there's one that's your hand size goes up, but your card draw goes down. It's stuff like that, right? That's kind of like a give and take.
Fair enough. All right. Well, we've managed to even extend the end part of this way past when it should be. So I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.